This quilt features Anita Good design teapots and carried away embroidery discs. It begins with a width of white fabric to fit the embroidery hoop with cutaway mesh stabilizer. An 8x8 stipple of .2 was stitched as background before the teapots were appliqued. Unlike the varied colors and fabrics featured in the disc, every teapot was embroidered with the same pink applique fabric and isocord threads in shades of pinks and greens. The carried away blocks were embroidered on the same pink fabric as the teapot applique with the same thread as all the teapots using cutaway mesh stabilizer. Mesh stabilizers work well with this application as they maintain the same soft hand as the fabric while supporting the stitches. After using both plain and fusible options, I grew to appreciate how the fusible no-show mesh made it one unit to hoop rather than two separate fabrics. The individual embroidery designs were stitched with only about 3/4 of an inch between the 8x8 blocks and cut apart after the entire width of fabric was embroidered. This method has less waste than individually hooping each design. With the blocks, embroidered fabrics were chosen for the frames, which make it similar to a single Irish chain. This is a great beginner block as it is just rectangles and squares. Each embroidered unit is framed with 4 pieces measuring 8 inches by 2.5 inches and 4 corner squares of 2.5 inch by 2.5 inch. With 1/4 inch seams, attach the borders to 2 opposite sides of the embroidered square. Add the corner units to the remaining 8-inch borders and complete the frame. To assist in matching the seams, press the teapot seams toward the corner square and the carried away seams away from the corner squares. Lay out the blocks as desired, alternating the 2 types and offsetting the columns. Sew the blocks into columns. Warm Company's Soft and Bright was chosen as batting for its drapeability. It is needle punched into a strong, thin base that allows for 10 inches between stitching. Cut batting strips for each column slightly longer with matching width to the piece top. Also cut backing fabric slightly longer and 1/2 inch wider than each column. Spray 1 column top with 505 temporary repositional fabric adhesive and smooth onto 1 batting strip. Put the walking foot on your sewing machine and stitch in the ditch on the crosswise seams that join every embroidered block. Stitching in the ditch is a method of quilting that minimizes how much thread shows on the top of the quilt. It is achieved by machine quilting in the seam lines of the quilt. Spray the batting side with 505 temporary repositional fabric adhesive and smooth onto the backing for the column. Stitch in the ditch of each block to sew all 3 layers together. Carefully match each intersection of this first piece with the next column top. This is done by sending a straight pin through the seam intersections at the 1/4 inch seam line, and with that pin still in place, putting pins on either side of that to hold the layers together. Baste together with the sewing machine set at a long stitch length. Add the next batting strip with 505 and again baste the seams together. Place the next backing strip, pretty sides facing, to the back side and matching the edges. Machine baste through all 6 layers. Set your serger for a left needle 3-thread stitch and stitch all 6 layers together with your needle following the basting stitches and the knife trimming an even seam allowance. The serger stitch will compress the batting in the seam. Press the recently joined top with its layer of batting along the seam line. Spray the batting and smooth to the piece top. Again, stitch in the ditch on the crosswise seam lines of each embroidered square to sew the batting to this column. Press and spray the backing into place and stitch in the ditch of each block. Trim the backing to match the width of the column. Repeat for each column, beginning with the piece top of the 3rd column, then the batting, and finally the backing. Follow with the 4th column and then the 5th column. When all the columns are sewn together, square up the top and bottom edges and finish with a binding.